A story from the Écrins. There is a phrase we use in French mountain rescue that sounds simple until you have lived it. Vivons jusqu'à preuve du contraire, alive until proven otherwise. It is not optimism, it is not wishful thinking. It is a professional discipline, a decision made in advance. Before the call comes in, before the coordinates appear on the screen, before you are standing in front of a map trying to calculate whether the window is still open. You decide in the quiet hours that the person on the mountain is alive. That assumption governs everything that follows. The route you choose, the speed at which you move, the risks you are willing to accept in order to close the distance. On the morning of June 14th, 2025, I needed that discipline more than I had needed it in a long time. Not because the situation was uncertain. It was not uncertain. We had voice contact. We had GPS coordinates accurate to 4 meters. We knew exactly where Ryan Kassler was, and we knew he was alive because he had spoken to us 14 minutes before we launched. His voice controlled in the way that frightened people sometimes become controlled when they understand that panic costs them something they cannot afford. The reason I needed the discipline was what he had told us in those 14 minutes. He was inside the mountain, not on it, not below a section of it. Inside, enclosed on all 4 sides by granite that had been held in place by winter ice for 6 months and had, in the first warm week of June, decided to move. He had heard it coming. He had had perhaps 3 seconds of warning, a sound he described as the mountain clearing its throat, and he had pressed himself into a shallow recess in the rock face and covered his head and waited for the world to stop. The world had stopped. He was unhurt. He was also completely encased. Behind him, the rock face. Above, below, and on both sides, the fallen material. In front of him, a gap approximately 30 centimeters wide and perhaps a meter tall, through which he could see the sky and through which he had managed to work his arm far enough to activate the locator on his phone. 30 centimeters. The Écrins do not forgive impatience. That is the first thing I tell every new crew member who joins us at the Détachement Aérien de la Gendarmerie in Villars-Saint-Pancras. Not because the terrain is more dangerous than other ranges, though it is serious and it demands respect, but because the distances are long, the valleys are deep, and the faces that hold the routes are composed of rock that has been moving, slowly and continuously, since the glaciers that once buttressed it began to retreat. We are the 3rd most glaciated massif in France. We were. Each summer, that statement becomes slightly less true. My name is Luc Casting. I have been a pilot with the Gendarmerie Air Section for 11 years, based in Briançon for 8. Before that, military aviation, Pumas, then NH-9s, the kind of flying that teaches you to work in degraded conditions at night with people shooting at the aircraft. It is a different education from mountain rescue, but it overlaps in the places that matter. The management of competing emergencies, the ability to hold a precise position under load, and the understanding that there is a hierarchy of information in a cockpit and that maintaining it under pressure is the difference between a mission and a memorial. I grew up 20 kilometers from where I now fly. My father was a guide. His father was a guide before him. The Casting family has been putting rope on these mountains for 3 generations, which means I learned to read the Écrins before I learned to fly over them. That knowledge, the way a particular face looks in early June when the snowmelt has been running behind the rock for 2 weeks, the specific gray-white color of the rock when the ice that binds its joints has just let go. That knowledge is not in any operations manual. It lives in the body, in the pattern recognition that happens before conscious thought. On June 14th, it told me we were going to have exactly 1 attempt. The Pelvoux face above the Alfroid Valley gets its sun early. By the time Ryan Kassler had worked his arm through the gap and activated his locator, the upper section of the route he had been attempting was already in full June sun. Warm enough, in combination with the saturated rock from 2 weeks of snowmelt, to continue the process that had started at some point in the night. Not the dramatic sudden collapse of film and imagination, but the quiet, incremental loosening of material that has been bonded by ice and is no longer bonded by anything. The face was still moving, Not fast, not dramatically, but moving. I want you to understand what that means for a rescue, because it is different from every other scenario I have described in these accounts. And the difference is important. In a weather emergency, the enemy is time and exposure. In a mechanical emergency, the enemy is the rate of degradation against the distance remaining. In a rockfall burial, the enemy is the mountain's continued intention. You cannot outfly it. You cannot outclimb it. You can only work around the outside of it with tools and knowledge and precise hands, and try to open a passage before the face decides to move again. That was what faced us at 0722 on June 14th, when Choucas 05 lifted off from Villars-Saint-Pancrace and turned southwest toward the Elefort Valley. I need to go back 6 hours to a ledge on the northeast face of the Pelvoux, where a man from Portland, Oregon was sitting in the dark with his back against granite and his knees against stone and 30 centimeters of gap between him and the open air. Ryan Kassler was 34 years old, a structural engineer, a climber of 12 years' experience across 4 continents. He had come to the Écrins for the first time the previous summer and had returned this June specifically for the Pelvoux, a peak he had read about, researched carefully, and planned a solo ascent via the Voie des Trois Couloirs, a moderate alpine route that his research had told him was straightforward in good conditions. His research had not told him what June 14th would look like after a warm May and 2 weeks of snowmelt above 3,000 meters. His research, to be fair, could not have. The guidebooks describe route conditions as they were when the guidebooks were written, and the Écrins of 2026 is not the Écrins of 5 years ago, or 10, or 20. The faces that were described as solid are less solid. The sections described as well frozen in June are freezing later each year and releasing earlier. The mountain is changing faster than the literature that describes it. He had set out from the Refuge du Pelvoux at 3:30. He was moving well, better than planned, and had reached the 3rd couloir by 5:15. The conditions were good, he told us later, better than he expected. The first sound came at 5:23. He described it as deep and textural, not the sharp crack of a single falling stone, but something slower and more fundamental, coming from above and to his left. He had heard rockfall before. He had been hit by rockfall once on a route in the Cascades, a single stone the size of a fist that had glanced off his shoulder and left a bruise the shape of a handprint for 2 weeks. He knew the sound. This was not that sound. What he heard at 0523 was not a stone releasing. It was a section, a body of rock, integrated and connected, that had been held in place by the ice in its joints all winter, and was now, as the temperature climbed above freezing for the 14th consecutive morning, releasing as a unit. He had 3 seconds. He did not use them to run. There was nowhere to run to. The couloir is a channel, steep-sided, with no lateral escape that could be reached in 3 seconds. What he did was press himself backward into the shallow recess he happened to be standing beside. A pocket in the rock face, perhaps 60 centimeters deep, the kind of feature that exists everywhere in fractured gneiss and means nothing in ordinary circumstances. In those 3 seconds, it meant everything. The section came down to his left, not a small piece, not a few stones, a column of material, later estimated by the PGHM Geological Advisor at somewhere between 40 and 80 tons, that swept the couloir from the left wall to a point perhaps 2 meters to his right, and then came to rest. The noise was absolute. The dust was absolute. For perhaps 90 seconds after it stopped, Ryan Kassler could not see his own hands. When the dust cleared, he was in a pocket of space approximately 2 meters wide, 1 meter deep, and 1.5 meters tall at its highest point. The recess behind him, the fallen material around and above him, the 30-centimeter gap at the front, through which the morning sky of the Écrins was visible in a thin, pale stripe. He was completely unhurt. He sat very still for a long time. He told us later it was perhaps 10 minutes, though he was not certain. He was thinking, he said, not panicking, not catastrophizing, but thinking in the careful and methodical way that structural engineers think when they are looking at a failed structure and trying to understand what it is and is not capable of doing next. What he concluded was this: The material around him was resting in a configuration that was stable for now. The gap at the front was not a crack in the structure. It was a space between two large blocks that had come to rest against each other at an angle. Those blocks were not moving. The material above the gap was supported by the blocks. The pocket he was in was, for the moment, real. For the moment. He did not know how long that moment would last. He did not know whether the continued warming of the morning sun on the upper face would release additional material. He did not know whether the vibration of a helicopter, or a team rappelling down the face above him, or a voice too loud, or nothing at all, might be enough to shift the balance of 40 tons of rock and close the 30 centimeters that were currently all that separated him from the open air. What he knew was that his phone had a signal. He worked his arm through the gap. He dialed 112. He spoke to the coordination center in Briançon in clear technical language, giving his GPS coordinates, his physical condition, and his structural assessment of his situation with the same precision he would have used to describe a failed beam in a building report. The dispatcher who took the call told me later that in 20 years of mountain rescue coordination, she had never received a more useful call from a person in distress. She said he sounded like he was describing someone else's problem. He told me the same thing when I visited him afterward. He said that was exactly how he had approached it. It was the only way he knew to be useful. The call reached me at 7:08. By 7:22, we were airborne. Choucas 05 is an Airbus EC-145, a twin-turbine medium helicopter that has been the backbone of high-altitude rescue in the French Alps since 2002. She is 11 meters of rotor diameter over a fuselage built for exactly this kind of work. A 90-meter winch on the starboard side, dual engines that give her redundancy I have needed twice and been grateful for both times. A load capacity of 1.7 tons including fuel, and a service ceiling that gets us to the top of the Barre des Écrins in 8 minutes from our base. She is not beautiful. She is functional in the way that serious working tools are functional, optimized for the task, carrying no weight that does not earn its place. I have flown her into places I would not have believed possible before I flew them, and she has not once given me a reason to doubt her. On June 14th, our crew was 5. Myself in the left seat, my co-pilot, Théo Marchand, in the right. 2 PGHM secourists, Sergeant Chef Isabelle Renard and Adjutant Paul Moret, in the rear. And Dr. Sophie Vernet, the SMER physician attached to the mission, positioned between them with her medical kit already open on her lap, reviewing what she knew about the patient, which was, structurally, nothing yet, because our patient was not injured. He was enclosed. The difference matters, and Sophie understood it better than most. The threat to Ryan Kassler in that pocket was not what had already happened. It was what might happen next. Secondary collapse is the dominant cause of death in rockfall burial scenarios, not the initial event. Survivors of the initial event are, by definition, alive. What kills them is the face continuing to move while the rescue is in progress. And the rescue itself can be a trigger. Vibration, displaced material, the wrong tool used in the wrong place. I want to explain what we were flying toward because it shapes every decision that follows, and I do not want you to fill the gaps with imagination. The Pelvoux Northeast face above the Elfroid Valley sits at between 3,100 and 3,600 meters. The approach from the air requires threading the Elfroid Valley, a deep forested trough that narrows significantly above the campsite, and then climbing rapidly to the face itself, which is concave and south-facing in its upper section, and composed primarily of gneiss, a metamorphic rock that, in the écrins, forms in roughly horizontal layers separated by joints. Those joints are where the ice lives in winter. They are also where the ice releases in early summer, and where, when it does, the sections between them become autonomous. Blocks of material that no longer have anything to hold them in place except gravity and the friction of their neighbors. The June 2025 melt had been running behind the face for 14 days. Between our helicopter, Choucas 5 and Ryan Kassler, we had approximately 22 minutes of flying time. In those 22 minutes, the face could move again, or it could not. There was no forecast for that, no model, no instrument reading. The geological advisor had told us by radio that the release section had likely relieved the immediate stress on the surrounding material, which was good. But that additional release was possible, particularly if the morning sun reached the upper face before we had completed the extraction. The sun would reach the upper face at approximately 7:40. We had lifted off at 7:22. We had perhaps 18 minutes before the face entered full sun, and the question of whether the extraction could be completed in 18 minutes was not one I was prepared to answer with confidence. "Time to face?" I asked Theo. He was watching the navigation display, one hand on the performance tablet, the other loose on the cyclic, the right seat posture of a co-pilot who is ready but not anticipating. Theo Marchand is 7 years younger than me and considerably more relaxed at altitude. He grew up in Grenoble, skied before he could read, started flying gliders at 16. He has the particular stillness of people who have never been afraid of empty air. 16 minutes at current speed, he said. 14 if we push it. Push it! He did not ask why. He had the same information I had, and he had done the same arithmetic. The Alefroid Valley opened below us as we climbed south. Pine forest on the lower slopes, the campsite visible as a pale rectangle beside the torrent, the road threading up toward the Pré de Madame Carle. Above the tree line, the gray-white faces of the Écrins Massif filled the windscreen in the way they always do at this point in the approach, which is the point at which you stop seeing the range from the outside and begin to exist inside it. The scale changes. The mountains stop being background and become context, the thing you are operating within rather than looking at. I have never found a way to describe that transition that does not sound like poetry, which is not a register I am comfortable in. But it is real. Ask any pilot who has flown in serious mountain terrain. There is a moment in the approach where the aircraft stops being the reference point and the mountain becomes it. "Visual on the couloir system," Theo said. I had it too. The northeast face of the Pelvoux at this distance was a pale gray wall streaked with the white lines of the 3 couloirs, narrow channels cut by centuries of freeze-thaw and snowmelt, each one a natural funnel for everything the face above chooses to release. The 3rd couloir, where Ryan Kassler had been climbing, was the rightmost of the 3. Even from 3 kilometers, I could see the disturbance. Not dramatically, not the raw scar of a fresh landslide, all red-brown exposed rock and chaos. More subtle than that, a change in the texture of the couloir's lower section, a different density to the gray, a roughness that had not been there in the satellite imagery from the previous day. The kind of thing you see and identify before you have consciously processed what it means. "There," I said. Theo nodded. "Paul," I said on the intercom, "visual in 30 seconds. I need your assessment on the debris field the moment we're close enough to see it." Paul Murray had been with the PGHM for 15 years. He had a civil engineering degree that he rarely mentioned, and a practical understanding of unstable terrain that no degree teaches. In the rear of the aircraft, I heard him shift forward in his harness. "Copy," he said. "Theo, can you give me the nose camera?" Theo put the forward FLIR camera feed onto Paul's monitor. Paul leaned toward it. "We had 10 minutes. What I am about to describe requires some explanation, because the extraction of a person enclosed in rockfall is not a procedure that appears in standard rescue training. It is a problem of structural engineering applied to a dynamic system, conducted at altitude, under time pressure, by people hanging from a helicopter on a 90-meter cable. The goal is not to remove the fallen material. You cannot do that safely, and attempting to do so is how you kill the person you are trying to rescue. The fallen material is, at that moment, the structure that is keeping the person alive. Remove the wrong piece and the entire configuration shifts. The goal is to create a passage, a route through the debris field wide enough for a person to be extracted without disturbing the blocks that are providing the structural support for the pocket. It is the difference between demolition and surgery. Paul Murray understood this. He had done it once before, in 2019 on the Meiji. A different mountain, a different face, a similar problem. That mission had taken 4 hours and had involved a ground team that had reached the debris field on foot. We did not have 4 hours. We did not have a ground team in position. What we had was 2 PGHM secourists, a winch, and whatever time remained before the face above Ryan Kassler decided the morning was warm enough to continue what it had started. "I'm seeing 2 anchor blocks," Paul said, his voice even and analytical, reading the camera feed as we close the distance. Large formation to the upper left. That's probably carrying most of the load. Second block to the lower right, smaller, supporting the gap. The gap itself looks stable. The blocks are in contact above it. If the upper formation holds, the gap holds. And if it doesn't, a pause, then we have a different problem. I filed that and flew. Isabel, she was already checking her equipment. Harness, prusiks, the small hydraulic spreading tool that is, in these situations, the difference between a passage and a prayer. Assessment of the gap from the camera? Too narrow for direct extraction. Her voice was precise and fast. The voice of someone who has already done the analysis and is presenting conclusions. We need to open it by at least 20 centimeters, possibly 30. The lower block on the right is the one to work. The geometry suggests it's movable without disturbing the upper formation. But I need to be on it to be certain. How long? If the block moves the way I think it will, 20 minutes, maybe 25. 20 to 25 minutes. On a face entering full sun in approximately 9 minutes. I did not share the arithmetic out loud. Everyone in the aircraft had done it themselves. We go, I said. The winch operation at altitude is a conversation between 4 people. The pilot, who holds the aircraft in position, the winch operator, who controls the cable and communicates the crew member's position, the crew member on the end of the cable, who is the hands and eyes and judgment of the team, and the person being rescued, who must stay still, stay calm, and trust that the people above them know what they are doing. On June 14th, we had a 5th voice in that conversation. Ryan Kassler's phone. He had kept it in his hand. Battery at 63% when we arrived on scene. Enough. The coordination center in Briançon had kept him on the line throughout our approach. And when we came within radio range, I spoke to him directly for the first time. Ryan. I used his first name deliberately. Not because the French do this with strangers. We generally do not. But because I needed him to understand that the voice in his ear was a person, not a system. This is Lieutenant Castaigne. I am directly above you. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to stay completely still. Do you understand? A pause, short. Yes, he said. I understand. Good. I am going to lower a team member to the debris field. She is going to work on the gap in front of you. This will take time. While she is working, I need you to tell me immediately if you hear anything, any sound from the rock around you, any movement, any change at all. Immediately. Do you understand? Yes. What is your current physical condition? I'm okay. Another pause. Cold. I've been in here for about 2 hours. But I'm okay. 2 hours in a rock pocket in the Écrins in early June. At altitude, even in June, the temperature inside a north-facing rock enclosure at dawn is close to 0. He had been there since approximately 0525. It was now 0735. Sophie, the doctor had been listening. Patient has been in enclosed, cold conditions for approximately 2 hours. No reported injuries. Hypothermia risk, she said immediately, and orthostatic issues when he comes out. He's been stationary in a confined position. We'll need to be careful with the extraction sequence. Understood. Theo had us in position above the debris field, a hover that required constant adjustment as the mountain thermals began to develop in the morning sun, small asymmetric updrafts off the gray face that pushed the aircraft left and right in slow, irregular pulses. He was handling it with the quiet competence I had come to expect from him, making corrections before they registered on the attitude indicator, holding us over a point in space that existed only in the GPS and in his hands. Paul, I said, winch Isabel to the field. Copy, commencing. The winch motor engages with a sound I have heard hundreds of times, a clean mechanical note that has always struck me as incongruously ordinary given the circumstances it accompanies. Isabelle Renard stepped off the skid the way experienced PGHM personnel always do, without drama, without ceremony, with the focused attention of someone who has committed to a course of action and is simply executing it. She dropped on the cable. I want to be honest about what the next moment required of me, because it is the part of winch operations that is hardest to convey. When your crew member goes off the skid, the aircraft changes. Not dramatically. Isabel's weight on the cable is accounted for in the performance calculations, and the EC-145 carries it without complaint. But there is a qualitative shift in the cockpit from the moment the cable is loaded. The aircraft is no longer self-contained. It is connected, tethered, to a human being who is now hanging in space beneath you, dependent on your ability to hold position against thermals and gusts, and the mountain's particular indifference to the requirements of helicopter operations. You do not think about this directly. Thinking about it would be a luxury, and the cockpit does not permit luxuries. What you do is fly. The connection is expressed through the controls, through the awareness, constant and physical, that the aircraft is not just carrying itself anymore. That awareness does not require thought. It requires presence. I was present. Isabel at the debris field, Paul said. Cable holding. She's on the material. I felt the load change slightly as her weight transferred from the cable to the rock below. A small shift, barely perceptible. I noted it and adjusted. Ryan, on his phone. The team member is now on the rock beside you. She is going to speak to you. Please listen to her instructions. A brief silence. Then his voice, and it had changed slightly. Still controlled, still precise, but with something else in it now. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated than relief. Okay, he said, I hear her. What Isabel found when she reached the debris field was roughly what the camera had suggested, and also nothing like what the camera had suggested. Camera feeds give you geometry. They give you size and position and the angles between things. They do not give you the feel of a block when you put your hand on it, whether it is sitting solidly or whether there is a faint tremor in it. The kind of micro movement that happens when a large mass of material is resting in a configuration it has not yet fully committed to. They do not give you the smell of fresh granite fracture, sharp and cold, or the sound the material makes when you shift your weight and the blocks around you register the change. What Isabel found was a debris field that was stable and was making its instability known to anyone with enough experience to listen for it. The upper formation, the large anchor block Paul had identified from the camera, was settled. It had moved to its current position and stopped, and the friction of its neighbors was holding it. That was good. That was what we needed. The lower block, the one that was forming the right side of the gap, was different. Not moving, not threatening to move, but carrying its load in a way that Isabel described to me afterward as provisional. The word of a person who has spent years learning to read what rock is about to do. The gap, as she could now confirm directly, was approximately 32 centimeters wide at its narrowest point. Ryan Kassler had described himself as physically fit and relatively lean. In cold weather clothing and without pack, Isabel estimated he would need 45 to 50 centimeters of clear passage to be extracted without contact with the surrounding material. Contact with the surrounding material, even glancing, was not acceptable. Contact with any part of the configuration that was carrying load could shift it. We needed to open the gap by 15 to 20 centimeters. The tool for this, the hydraulic spreader, a piece of equipment that most people associate with vehicle extrication, is not a precision instrument. It is a wedge that can be opened to a controlled width, slowly with measured force. In a car wreck, you use it at full capacity, full speed, because the metal is dead and your only constraint is the patient. On a rockfall debris field, you use it the way a surgeon uses a retractor, opening a fraction of a millimeter at a time, reading the response of the surrounding material after each increment, stopping immediately if anything indicates the structure is reacting to the load. Isabel had done this once before, on the Mayhay in 2019. She told me afterward that this was both an advantage and a disadvantage. An advantage because she knew what to expect. A disadvantage because the 2019 extraction had taken 3 hours and 40 minutes. And she was very aware on the end of that cable in the early sun of June 14th that we did not have 3 hours and 40 minutes. I'm placing the spreader, she said on the radio. Her voice was the voice she uses when she is concentrating, which is to say, almost no voice at all. Just enough to transmit the information. Copy, Paul said. Ryan. She was speaking to him directly now, her face at the gap. I'm going to place a tool against the lower block. You may hear some noise. You may feel some vibration. This is expected and controlled. I need you to stay completely still and tell me the moment you notice any change in the material around you. A pause from inside the pocket. The vibration is the thing I'm worried about, he said, his engineer's mind still working. If the upper formation is stress-loaded, vibration could be a trigger. I know, Isabel said. I'm working with that in mind. Another pause. Okay, he said. I trust you. In 11 years of flying mountain rescue, I have heard a great many things said on the radio in the moments when the outcome is uncertain. Most of them are practical. Some of them are frightened. Occasionally, they are brave in ways that make the cockpit briefly very quiet. I trust you, said by a man who had been in a rock pocket for 2 hours, in the cold, who had just been told that the tool about to be used near him could, if it triggered a secondary collapse, change his situation from difficult to unsurvivable. That was one of the quiet ones. Sun on the upper face in 4 minutes, Theo said. He had not stopped monitoring the light. Neither had I. Copy, I said. I did not relay this to Isabel. She knew. The hydraulic spreader opened by increments so small I could not observe them from the cockpit. What I could observe was Isabel's posture, the angle of her body, the position of her hands, the occasional small adjustment of her weight on the cable as she shifted the tool's placement by a centimeter and waited for the material to respond. She had the stillness of someone doing very precise work in a very small space, which is exactly what she was doing. Ryan Kassler was silent inside the pocket. He had understood, without being told explicitly, that unnecessary conversation consumed attention that was needed elsewhere. 3 millimeters, Isabel said very quietly. No movement in the surrounding material. Copy. Paul's voice was equally quiet. We were all, without having discussed it, speaking at reduced volume. There was no rational reason for this. Sound transmission through rock at these scales is not influenced by the volume of conversation above it, but it felt correct. It was the way you behave when you are working around something that requires delicacy. 5 millimeters, still stable. The sun reached the upper face. I saw it happen. The shadow line retreating up the gray wall above the debris field. The quality of the light changing from the flat, diffuse gray of pre-sun to the direct low-angle gold of a June morning at altitude. The upper gneiss caught it and reflected it and became briefly almost beautiful. I had spent 11 years watching that light on these faces and finding it beautiful. On June 14th, it was the most dangerous thing in my immediate environment. Isabel, I kept my voice level. Sun is on the upper face. A pause. I know, she said. 8 millimeters. Still stable. 8 millimeters. We needed 150 to 200. I did not calculate how long that was going to take. Calculating would not have helped. Ryan, I said on his phone, how are you doing? A brief silence. I had a sudden awareness of what that silence sounded like from inside the pocket. The hum of the aircraft above, the sound of the spreader working, the light changing outside the gap, the cold. Still here, he said. Still listening. Good. Tell me the moment anything changes. I will. The minutes passed, the way minutes pass in a hover, not in a line but in a loop, the same set of instrument readings cycling through your attention, the same control inputs repeating in variation, the same awareness held at the same pitch for however long is required. Flying a hover at altitude over terrain is not taxing in the way that complex navigation is taxing. It is taxing the way holding a difficult physical position is taxing. The effort is constant, low-level, and cumulative, and the measure of it is not felt in the moment but afterward. I was, and I say this as a statement of professional fact rather than any kind of claim, entirely comfortable. Theo was beside me, monitoring everything I was monitoring and several things I was not, which is what a good co-pilot does. He had not said anything for 6 minutes, which told me he had nothing to add, which was the correct answer. 30 millimeters, Isabel said. 30. We needed 150. 40. The upper face was fully in sun now. If the warming was going to trigger secondary release, it would happen in the next 20 minutes, possibly sooner, depending on how much of the overnight melt had penetrated the upper joints. I had no instrument for that. I had the face itself, visible through the windscreen, gray and warm, and offering nothing. 50 millimeters. There's movement. Her voice had not changed. It was still the focused, minimal voice. But the word movement went through the aircraft like a cold current. Where? Paul immediately. Lower block. Left edge, not the load-bearing face. The block is rotating very slightly, maybe 2 degrees. It's redistributing load internally. The gap is still open. A pause that lasted perhaps 3 seconds and felt considerably longer. It's settled, she said. 50 millimeters holding. Ryan, keeping my voice steady. Did you feel any movement? A pause. Yes, he said. Right side. The rock on my right shifted. It moved and then it stopped. Another pause. I think it's still okay, but I want you to know. You were right to tell me. Stay still. 70 millimeters, Isabel said. The pace had increased slightly. Either the block was moving more freely now that it had settled, or Isabel had judged that the rate of movement was acceptable and had increased the increments. Either way, 70. We needed 150. Paul, I said, what does the upper face look like to you on camera? He was watching it. No change. Material is stable at this scale. I'm not seeing any large formations moving. And smaller material? A pause. There's some grain movement in the sun line. Nothing significant. Grain movement. Individual particles of material loosening at the surface where the ice has released. It was not collapse. It was not secondary rockfall. It was the face breathing, the normal, continuous process of the écrins adjusting to the season. In ordinary circumstances, it was background noise. In these circumstances, it was a reminder that the window was not staying open indefinitely. 90 millimeters, Isabel said. 60 to go. At this rate, perhaps 8 more minutes. In those 8 minutes, I want to tell you what I was aware of, because it is the part of these accounts that I find hardest to convey accurately. I was aware of Ryan Kassler in the dark of the pocket, listening to the sound of the spreader and the aircraft, and the stone around him, holding very still because very still was the right thing to be, and trusting a voice on a phone in the hands of a woman he could not see. I was aware of Isabel on the cable, working with the precision and patience of someone who had decided, without drama, that precision and patience were what the situation required and that she had enough of both. I was aware of Theo beside me, holding the aircraft in place with the quiet authority of a man who is very good at exactly one thing and is doing it. I was aware of Sophie in the rear, her medical kit organized and ready for a patient who was, for the moment, better than we had feared. And I was aware of the face, the gray-white gneiss of the écrins, warm now in the June sun, deciding, in whatever non-conscious, geological way that decisions are made by rock and ice, what it was going to do next. I could not influence that decision. I could not speed it or slow it or negotiate with it. I could only hold my position and fly the aircraft and keep the channel open and wait for Isabel to tell me we were ready. 110 millimeters, she said. 40 to go. 120. 130. 140 millimeters, she said. I'm going to do a test. Ryan, I'm going to push the spreader to 150 and hold. Tell me immediately if you feel anything change. Ready, he said. A pause that lasted, I think, approximately 15 seconds. 150, she said. Ryan? His voice when it came was different from any version of it I had heard in the previous 38 minutes. Not differently controlled, not differently calm. Different in a way that is hard to describe in technical language because the technical language is not adequate. I can see it, he said. I can see the gap. It's open. Don't move yet, Isabel said immediately. I need to assess the passage. I know. A pause. I know. Take your time. She assessed the passage. 45 seconds of silence during which she moved around the gap, looking at the angles, putting her hand in at different points to check the clearance, reading the configuration one more time before she committed to the most critical part of the operation. What she was determining was the sequence of extraction, how Ryan Kassler would move through the passage, in what orientation, at what speed, with what contact points, and what must be avoided. An incorrect extraction sequence, a shoulder catching the wrong block, a boot displacing material that was part of the load path, could close the gap around him mid-extraction. The sequence had to be right before it began, because once it began, it could not be paused. "Ryan," she said, "I'm going to talk you through this step by step. I need you to do exactly what I say, in the order I say it, with no variations. Can you do that?" "Yes." "First, remove your pack. Carefully, set it against the back wall of the pocket." A pause, movement sounds, very quiet. "Done," he said. "Second, move to the face of the pocket, on your knees. Do not stand. Do not put pressure on the right wall." A pause. "Done?" "Good. Now, on your hands and knees, I want you to put your right hand and arm through the gap first. Slowly, keep your elbow below the lower block." The longest pause yet. And then, a hand appeared in the gap. Fingers first, then a gloved hand, then an arm to the elbow. Alive, present, real. Isabel gripped it. "I have you," she said. "Now listen carefully." The extraction took 11 minutes. I know this because I was counting, and because the flight recorder confirms it. 11 minutes from the moment Isabel gripped Ryan Kassler's hand to the moment he cleared the gap and was on the cable beside her, blinking in the June sun of the Écrins, looking at a world he had not been certain, for parts of the previous 2.5 hours, that he was going to see again. The face did not move during those 11 minutes. It moved 14 minutes after Ryan Kassler was in the aircraft. Paul saw it first on the camera, a section of the upper face, approximately 30 meters above the debris field, that had been stable all morning and was no longer stable. Not a catastrophic release, a controlled geological continuation of the process that had begun at 0523. Perhaps 10 tons of material moving in the way that material moves when it has decided the time has come. All at once and without announcement. It took the gap with it. The pocket where Ryan Kassler had spent 2.5 hours ceased to exist in approximately 4 seconds. The configuration that Isabel had worked so carefully around, the anchor blocks, the provisional lower block, the 32 centimeters of gap that had become 150, compressed into the debris field and became part of it. Paul watched it on the camera for a moment, then he turned off the feed. We were already 10 kilometers south, heading for Briançon. Ryan Kassler was in the rear of the aircraft with a thermal blanket around his shoulders and Sophie's hands on his wrist, counting his pulse. He was looking out the window at the Écrins. The peaks he could now see from above, gray-white in the morning sun, vast and ordinary and continuous, doing what they have always done. "Did you get what you came for?" I asked him. He looked at me in the mirror that lets me see the rear cabin. "The summit?" he said. "Yes." A pause. He looked back at the peaks. "No," he said. "I didn't even get close." "You'll come back?" A longer pause. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe." Another pause. "The route needs to be reevaluated. The conditions have changed. The guidebook description doesn't match what's up there now." He paused again. "That's not a complaint. It's just true." "It is just true." That is perhaps the most precise thing I have heard a climber say about the Écrins in 11 years of flying over them. The massif is the same range it has always been, the same names on the same maps, the same refuges, the same routes described in the same guidebooks. And it is also not the same range at all. The ice that held it together has been retreating for decades, and the faces that were described as stable in one generation are being reevaluated in the next. The mountain does not update its own guidebook. That work falls to the people who climb it and to the people who fly above it watching it change. We landed at Briançon at 0831. Ryan Kassler was transferred to the hospital, assessed for mild hypothermia and the compression effects of 2.5 hours in a confined position, and discharged the following day. He had a bruise on his right forearm from the initial rockfall and 2 abrasions on his wrist from the extraction. That was all. Isabelle Renard was back in the operations room by 1100. Paul Moret filed his mission report and went to lunch. Théo Marchand signed off on the aircraft log and went home to Briançon, where his daughter was, he told me, currently attempting to explain something about her school that required his full attention. I sat in the crew room at Centimetres and drank coffee that had been made sometime before I got there, and written a mission debrief that was accurate and complete, and said nothing about what it felt like to watch 14 minutes of geological time close a space that had held a man alive for 2.5 hours. Some things go in the report. Some things go in the quiet hours. I visited Ryan Kassler the following afternoon. He was sitting up in the hospital bed in Briançon with his phone on the tray table and a cup of coffee going cold beside it. He had been corresponding, he told me, with the Écrins National Park and with the PGHM, providing his detailed account of conditions on the Voie des Trois Couloirs for the Route Information Database. He had photographs from before the event, taken on his ascent. He had notes. He had the kind of structural analysis of the failure that, as I read it, told me something important about the kind of person he was. He was trying to be useful. The freeze-thaw cycle this spring was abnormal, he said. He had been talking to the geological advisor. 14 consecutive mornings above freezing after an exceptionally cold April. The joints in that section of face would have been fully ice-bonded right up until the warm period began. Then the melt would have run behind the face for 2 weeks without any gradual acclimation. The ice released quickly, across a large area, and the joint water had nowhere to go. He paused. He was looking at the wall, not at me. I should have known, he said. I did the research. I knew the conditions this spring were anomalous. I read about the permafrost melt and the rockfall increase on the Mahe. I looked at the face that morning and it looked like the photos in the guidebook. I had heard versions of this before, not often in the context of rockfall, more often in the context of weather, of avalanche, of the 100 ways that the mountains present a face that looks like the photographs in the guidebook and is something different underneath. The face looked like the photographs because it is still the same face, I said. The photographs are correct. The face has not changed its shape. What has changed is what is happening inside it. He thought about that. That's harder to prepare for, he said. Yes, I said, it is. I left him with a copy of a new route advisory that the park had already issued for the Voie des Trois Couloirs, incorporating his observations in the PGHM geological assessment. His information had gone in within 18 hours of the event. The mountain does not update its own guidebook, but sometimes the people who know it help with the drafting. That afternoon, I went back to Choucas 05. She was on the maintenance ramp, the winch cable being inspected section by section. Standard post-mission protocol when the winch has been loaded at altitude for an extended period. I put my hand on the fuselage, as I always do after a hard mission. The metal was warm in the June sun. I thought about Ryan Kassler's hand coming through the gap. Fingers first, then the gloved hand, then the arm to the elbow. The specific quality of that moment, not dramatic, not triumphant, just present. A human hand in the sunlight held by another human hand on the side of a mountain that had been willing for just long enough to give him back. I thought about the 14 minutes, the face moving again, and the pocket closing, and the 4 seconds it had taken for 2.5 hours of survival to be compressed into the debris field and disappear. I have thought about those 14 minutes a great deal since that day. I suspect I will continue to do so. There is a question that sits inside those 14 minutes that I do not have an answer to, and I have stopped trying to find one. The question is simply, why? Why did the face hold for 11 minutes of extraction and 14 minutes of flight, and then move? What was the difference between those 11 minutes in the previous 2.5 hours, or between those 14 minutes and the previous 11? The geological answer, the warming, the melt, the joint water reaching its threshold, is accurate and incomplete. It describes the mechanism. It does not explain the timing. The timing was not a decision. The mountain does not make decisions. But it was also not random, in the sense that randomness implies an absence of causation. There were causes. They were complex and they were interacting, and they produced a particular outcome at a particular moment. The particular outcome was that Ryan Kassler was in the aircraft when the face moved, and not in the pocket. I do not know my own number of missions. We do not, in this unit, track it the same way other rescue flight services do. What I know is that the number has held. That the mornings when I drive up to Villers-Saint-Pancras and put my hand on the fuselage and fly toward whatever the mountain has decided to present, those mornings have not yet produced a day when I brought back less than I was asked to bring. I am not naive enough to believe that record is a guarantee. I am experienced enough to know it is something worth carrying carefully. Vivant jusqu'à preuve du contraire. Alive until proven otherwise. It held on June 14th. It held. Before you go, I want to say something about the people this story is built from. Luc Casting is fictional. The PGHM is not. The Peloton de Gendarmerie de Haute Montagne, the High Mountain Gendarmerie, has been operating in the French Alps since 1958. More than 40,000 interventions since they began. More than 50,000 people brought home. The men and women who do this work are military personnel who are also qualified mountain guides, ski instructors, canyon guides, elite mountaineers who have chosen to spend their careers going up toward things the rest of the world is moving away from, carrying the weight of other people's decisions and other people's lives in terrain that does not negotiate. They are funded by the French state, which means they are available to everyone, regardless of nationality or ability to pay. If you are on a mountain in the Hautes-Alpes and you need help, they will come. That is not a marketing promise. It is a professional commitment held by real people in a real aircraft in a real valley in the south of the French Alps. If this story meant something to you, if the image of a hand coming through a gap and another hand meeting it and the face moving 14 minutes later, if that meant something, please consider giving to your local mountain rescue organization. In France, associations like the Secours Catholique Montagne or the Société Nationale de Sauvetage en Mer support the volunteer elements of the rescue ecosystem. In the UK, mountain rescue teams are entirely voluntary and depend on donations. In the US, search and rescue is often funded through county budgets that are never large enough. Find your local team. Give what you can. The readiness that answers a phone at 700 when a man's arm appears through a gap in a rockfall field. That readiness is built over years, maintained by people, and sustained by support. And if you want to hear more stories from the mountains, please subscribe. Leave a like. Every one of them helps. There are more mountains, more faces, more mornings when someone needs to come home. We will be here.